So you've seen the problem, you've seen the people who created this problem. Now let's talk about the solution. How can Sri Lanka escape this mess? The obvious answer is the IMF, the International Monetary Fund. Sri Lanka could negotiate a bailout package with them. How would that work? A bailout package is basically a loan. We're talking about billions of dollars here. The IMF can disburse this loan to the Sri Lankan government. It can top up the reserves. It can avoid a default. And everybody goes home happy. Well, not so fast. Reaching out to the IMF is a very complicated process. It's a 50-50 call. Some bailouts are successful, like India and Kenya, or Mexico in the 1980s. Others are not so much. Just think back to the Grexit fiasco in the mid-2010s. The fact is, the IMF is a double-edged sword. Yes, they bail you out, but they also set strict conditions. You must cut down subsidies. You must raise interest rates, track down wasteful spending. Basically, there's a lot more scrutiny once the IMF puts money into a country. So naturally, the Rajapaksas are not keen on that option. They don't want scrutiny. They run Sri Lanka like a family business. Oversight is not their strong suit. So they preferred bilateral packages, $2.5 billion from China, another $2.5 billion from India, $150 million from Bangladesh. These loans help in the short run. But they're like band-aids on a bullet wound. Ultimately, you need a major surgery. And that major surgery is the IMF bailout. It wouldn't be a first for Colombo, though. In the last 56 years, they have sought an IMF bailout some 16 times. Only one country is ahead on that list, and that country is Pakistan. They have sought more IMF bailouts than Sri Lanka. And that's not a proud list to be on. Even the Rajapaksas have seen the writing on the wall. The Chinese are not eager to help them. There are limits to what India can do. So IMF is clearly the way to go, which brings us to the logistics. How can Sri Lanka get an IMF bailout? For starters, they need a finance minister. They don't have one. Until this weekend, Basil Rajapaksa held that position. That's the president's younger brother. Last month, he held talks with the IMF's Asia-Pacific officials. This month, he was supposed to fly to Washington to officially begin the bailout talks. But that's not happening. So right now, Sri Lanka needs a good finance minister, someone who understands the crisis, someone who can get them a good IMF deal. But that is only half the job done. Sri Lanka's total external debt is $45 billion. A bailout alone cannot make that disappear. It's a very big sum of money. But here's what it can do. It can open up more avenues, bring in more foreign investment, resume tourism, basically kickstart the Lankan economy. The IMF has already chalked out the basics. Let me tell you what their latest report says. Based on staff analysis, the fiscal consolidation necessary to bring down debt levels to safe levels would require excessive adjustment over the coming years, pointing to a clear solvency problem. Fiscal consolidation, let me translate that for you. More taxes, large spending cuts, fewer subsidies and higher interest rates. That is the gist of the IMF's plan for Sri Lanka. In the short run, that is a lot of pain. Ordinary Sri Lankans will feel the pinch. But the IMF is not looking at the short run. They're looking at restructuring the Lankan economy. And that takes two things, time and patience. Which brings us to the Sri Lankan leadership. Do they have the patience? Well, in the past, they did not. We told you that Sri Lanka has sought IMF relief 16 times. And each time, the IMF set strict conditions. Guess how many deals Sri Lanka actually fulfilled? Just 9. The rest of them were abandoned midway. The latest was in 2020. Gotabaya Rajapaksa decided to ditch the IMF program. Instead, he charted his own policy. More loans from China, poor tax cuts, and bizarre pet projects. I have an example. Gotabaya Rajapaksa was obsessed with organic agriculture. He banned all chemical fertilizers, all kinds of synthetic pesticides, and he decided that all Lankan agriculture will be organic. Guess what happened next? Crops failed all over Sri Lanka. The government had to compensate farmers with $200 million. Plus, they lost valuable foreign exchange. Take tea, for instance. Normally, Sri Lanka earns $1 billion by exporting tea. It's a flagship product. After Gotabaya's little experiment, that changed. Tea exports fell by $425 million. And this is Sri Lanka's real problem. The leaders keep getting richer. They keep coming up with weird policies, and in the end, it's the people who suffer. So coming back to my first question, how can Sri Lanka escape this mess? In the short run, by getting an IMF bailout; in the long run, with meaningful reforms. You cannot run a 21st century economy with tea, rubber and tourism. You need resilient industries. The question is, who will implement these reforms? The family that created this mess? Or a fresh crop of realistic and selfless leaders? Well, that's a question for the Lankans to decide. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.